Miss Davis, are you with us?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, loud and clear. How are you?
Great, how are you? I'm so
Better
happy
than
to
I
be
deserve. I
here.
appreciate you. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be speaking with you today. I'm going to have you give a little bit of an introduction about yourself.
Mhm.
Introductions never do justice, especially with our current speakers today. So I'm going to give you the floor for 5 minutes, if you may.
Okay, so like you
Please
said,
go ahead.
my bachelor's degree is in journalism and media production. I am Christian Palestinian, but I wasn't raised around other Middle Easterners. I didn't speak the Arabic language, so I was always interested in learning more about my cultural identity. I learned that my great-grandfather was a former mayor of Bethlehem, and I found that really interesting and intriguing when I was in my journalism and media production program. And so really what I wanted to speak to is just the media and how it contributes to injustice, and how I was able to find that through my documentary film, Christians of Palestine: Life Behind the Wall. Now, my intent in doing this was, yes, number one, to really learn about my cultural identity, but also in the media here in the United States, there's a very obvious bias towards Palestinians, and the way that Palestinians are perceived is in a negative light, and Israel's often perceived in a very positive light. And the information that I was getting from back home, my family in Bethlehem, was very different. And so I wanted to film this documentary, and in the summer of 2016 and in the winter of 2016, I visited twice for about a week and a half, both times, and filmed that documentary. And I came back and realized what I had witnessed on the ground was very different than what the mainstream media was presenting to the American public. And so that sent me on a journey to investigate and look deeper into the situation. And I didn't really understand a lot about Christian Zionism, but I knew that there was a Christian base that really strongly supported Israel in this country. So basically, I started to research, and I found out there was already a segment done on Christians in the Holy Land. And it was a 60-minute special done by Bob Simon. Well, he interviewed some of the same people that I had interviewed. And through this interview, one of the people that he had interviewed, her name was Claire. And she has the apartheid wall on 3 sides of her home and business. And I have this on video of her telling me about how a very famous media came to her and received a very overwhelming testimony from her son that moved the producer. And the producer wanted to put this in the production. And he was told by the network to remove it. And when that happened, if you watch the whole 60-minute segment, you'll find out that the ambassador of Israel, Michael Oren, was confronted by Bob Simon in this segment about him going to the network and complaining to the CEO of the network and about the production prior to it ever being completed. And so when he did that, Bob Simon said, "I've never had this happen before a production is completed." And he says, Michael Oren says, well, there's a first time for everything. And it seems like he was very nervous about the Christian Palestinian message getting out to other Christians in the United States by his response. And that's when I started to dig and learn more about the Christian Zionism and how there are Christians in this country that believe that the Jews should be returned to the Holy Land in order for some holy war, Armageddon, to take place. And that this ideology has really many Christians in this country supporting perpetual wars, supporting the consistent wars that we see, because in their minds, this is how the Bible plays out. And I believe it's a very important thing that people need to be informed on, and that this injustice, obviously, they did not want to humanize the Palestinian people. When they took out Claire's son, giving a testimony about what he experienced under occupation, they were taking out the human side of the Palestinian people. And so they didn't want that presented. And that was the purpose in my film, was to hopefully relate to the 65 to 70% of the United States population who identify as Christian, and have them see that other Christians are suffering under oppression. And the message in both films, the 60-minute special in 2012 and mine that was completed in 2017, had the exact same message, that Christians weren't leaving due to Islamic extremism in the Holy Land, but they were leaving due to the Israeli occupation, which was very controversial, I believe, because it's not the mainstream media. It's not what the mainstream media is putting out to the American public.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. There's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
And yeah, honestly. And the more I thought about it, it just, the discussions that we keep kind of sorting into is like, you become labeled a conspiracy theorist with these kind of, realizations that you might have, right? Like the word media is very loose in our culture, and it's a particular challenge. And I really applaud you for being able to kind of articulate all of this today. And it's very impressive, and I really appreciate it. So just moving forward to some of the questions in our preparation and me getting to know you, you gracefully stated in relation to your motivation to the film that you did, Christians of Palestine, Life Behind the Wall. You, if I recall correctly, went back in 2016, correct?
Correct.
And part of the idea, like you just stated, is you wanted to meet your family and understand your heritage. And of course, you expanded to us right now that it went beyond that, but later you expanded that you're motivated to humanize the Palestinian people. Here's my question to you. Filmmaking at its core is involved in the transfer of ideas. Okay, what role does filmmaking have in advancing social justice?
That's such a great question. When you see the mainstream media, most of what you see is people who are commentators, and they claim that they are experts on a specific topic, and they're speaking about people or for a people. But with documentary filmmaking, especially independent filmmaking, you are able to go to the people and lift these voices of marginalized groups who often are not heard in our mainstream news media, and get their voices heard, their stories heard firsthand. And really, that is what will make a difference. The mainstream media is not going to make a difference, but those working on the ground, producing documentaries, going to the people will.
Well understood. Well understood. And I could not agree more. What do you think is the belief or the cause for the near absence that we're seeing right now for social justice?
The absence of social justice. I mean, honestly, I believe that the media plays a significant role in all of this. I believe, I think I told you in our discussion before about General Wesley Clark and his statement in 2007 in a Democracy Now! Interview. He states that only weeks after 9/11, he found out that America already had an objective to go to war with 7 countries in 5 years. And he names these countries. He says Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. And I really want to get into this because what's happening in our media is a lot of information is not being connected for the American people. And when things are repeated in the media, people tend to remember those things. They see those things as important. But if it's not repeated, then it's not sticking. And our media is not connecting things, some things that I actually have connected. And like you said, it's seen as conspiracy theory, but they're actual facts.
Exactly. And for our listeners, I'm just going to unpack this for a second because that's a bulk of like what I wanted to ask you. And I apologize for the tangential thought, but for our listeners, Ms. Davis is kind of focusing on the remarks that were made by General Wesley Clark, and in his remarks to his audience. He was, I believe he was interviewed at that point, and he was saying that the United States was planning, and I quote, to take out 7 countries in the next 5 years. And as you gracefully stated, the countries. So with that realization that comes that perhaps war is manufactured. What's the impact that that has on social justice in your eyes?
Absolutely. I believe there's so much information out there I wish I could cover, but I believe that, you know, there's so many people like Colin Powell, who was a Secretary of State, for instance, and he said that his speech at the United Nations pushing for the war in Iraq in 2003 was a blot on his record. Why was it a blot on his record? Well, because actually it was Colonel Wilkerson, who worked for him, came out and stated why it was a blot on his record. He said that there was no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and that Saddam had no connections to Al-Qaeda. 9/11, this is where it all started. 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi nationals. None were Afghani, none were Iraqi. But we went to war with Afghanistan and Iraq. That's who we went to war with. And if you really take apart all of the different information from all over, it starts to connect. And there's so much in history, there's so much in the media today that's not connected. So people easily will brush it off as conspiracy theory because it's not repeated. It's not something that they are aware of or that their media is telling them about. Therefore, it must not be true.
Yes, that's honestly, yeah, that's and it kind of goes back to what Elena was saying. I can't help but kind of starting to bring the whole picture. We kind of had an introduction to like, okay, fear in the beginning, and then like fear of being criticized, and like Mr. Chadburn right now is saying that, you know, the most effective social mobilization today was actually from the ground up, and that process might be stalled if we don't have the awareness of, you know, people like you kind of addressing things that are in the media. And in our conversation, you said that it was actually very cool when you said people and please correct me if I'm quoting you out of context here, but you told me that people tend to believe things that are repeated to them in the media as propaganda, and that becomes their truth. Did I quote that correctly?
That's it. If the media tells them, whether it's Fox News, MSNBC, left or right-wing news media, they seem to be in sync when it comes to war. They're always promoting war, and but there's never any connection. Nobody will connect the information I'm connecting that points to wars being manufactured. And there's a reason. The government doesn't want the people to know that wars are manufactured, obviously. It works against their interests. So I just feel like people need to come together and from the ground up and make more voices like this heard. It just, you know, that's how change is going to happen. It's not going to happen through our government or our mainstream news media, for sure.
So we have 3 minutes to go, and I would be remiss if I cut you short without telling you, how'd you find it after going to meet your family in 2016? I know that's a little bit of a personal experience, but how was it kind of reconnecting there?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can explain some of my experience as an American, somebody who's really detached from my culture. You know, I get to the Tel Aviv airport because I'm allowed to fly into the Tel Aviv airport. I can explain that, you know, because I'm going to the West Bank and going into the Palestinian territories, they profile those people and they put you aside and they question you. And some of those questions were interesting. You know, who's your father? Who's your father's father? It was so interesting because I don't think being in America, I've ever faced real, true discrimination. But over there, I did. I felt profiled. I felt like, why are they questioning me? What's the deal here? And then once it was done with the questioning, I was sitting there for about an hour. I had to call for a taxi, or actually my grandfather had to call for a taxi to pick me up from the Tel Aviv airport. Now, my grandfather, he actually has American citizenship. He actually served in the Navy. But he also is Palestinian, born in Palestine, has a Palestinian ID. He was not allowed to pick me up from the Tel Aviv airport. So that right off the bat, I was like, okay, this is discrimination. There's something not right here. Why can't my grandfather pick me up from the airport? And then as you drive into the territories, you know, there's walls everywhere. And then when I was filming, there were checkpoints. And there's even checkpoints when you're driving through where Israel is controlling those checkpoints, going from one Palestinian city to another. And that's when I started to understand the settlements and how that's an issue, breaking up the Palestinian cities so that there could never be a two-state solution, which is interesting because there's a settler leader, actually, Daniela Wise, who states this in a documentary called Stone Cold Justice. It's about the torture of Palestinian children in Israeli detention centers. And she says in this interview that her and Ariel Sharon in the 70s had made an idea and a plan to strategically build settlements so there would never be an option for a Palestinian state in Judea or Samaria. And some of the countries, she actually was interviewed by Haaretz, and that's an Israeli source. And she names 4 countries that she wants to expand Israel into. And it was Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. And those 4 countries are on General Wesley Clark's list. And as I just started to connect all this information, I started to understand what our wars are about and how Christian Zionism and political Zionism are really, they're pushing for these wars and never-ending injustice for the Palestinian people, but not just the Palestinian people, the Middle East, Africa, and other countries. You know, this expands the Palestinian